Often when we think of wars, we think of the people doing the fighting. But what about the unsung heroes and heroines? For instance, did you know that during the First World War, over 5,000 clergymen served as chaplains in the British Army? 179 of them died in the conflict, and 3 were awarded Britain's highest medal for valour, the Victoria Cross. One of those chaplains was not only awarded the VC, but also the Distinguished Service Order and the Military Cross, without ever carrying a rifle. A slightly built, short-sighted, teetotal vegetarian in his early 50s who'd been a school teacher for most of his life. Theodore Hardy was the most decorated British non-combatant of the First World War, a vicar on the front line. And this is his story. Theodore Hardy was born in Exeter in 1863, the son of a successful textile merchant. Following an education in the London area, he graduated from the University of London and became a school teacher. By the end of the 1880s, he'd married Florence Elizabeth Hastings, with whom he had 2 children, a daughter, Mary Elizabeth, born in 1890, and a son, William, in 1893. It was just after the birth of his daughter that the family moved to the East Midlands city of Nottingham. Here, Theodore Hardy became an assistant master at Nottingham High School, a position that he held for the next 16 years. During his time teaching here, one of his pupils was the young D.H. Lawrence, who'd been awarded a county council scholarship to attend the prestigious establishment. Always a deeply religious man, Hardy was ordained as a Church of England priest in 1898. Despite this calling, he remained a master at Nottingham High School before going on to become headmaster at Bentham Grammar School in Yorkshire in 1907. Finally, he left teaching and became a full-time clergyman in 1913. He became rector of the rural parish of Hutton Roof in the south of the Lake District, just west of Kirkby Longsdale. It was here in June 1914 that his wife Florence died. It was here too that less than 2 months later, the Reverend Theodore Hardy heard that Great Britain had declared war on Germany. Maybe it was the fact that he was now a widower and his children were in their 20s, but whatever the reason, Hardy tried to volunteer to serve his country. He applied to become an Army Chaplain, but being 51, he was seen as too old and was turned down. Hardy kept up a barrage of applications and in the meantime took a first aid course and prepared to volunteer as a stretcher bearer on the Western Front. In the end, however, his badgering paid off, and the Reverend Hardy was made a temporary chaplain to the forces in August 1916. Prior to the war, Army chaplains had principally overseen church services for the troops and presided at funerals. Both, especially the latter, were still very much in demand in the First World War, but Hardy, like many other chaplains, wanted to do more than that and look after the welfare of the troops on the front line itself. Arriving in France, he successfully applied to be attached to the 8th Battalion Lincolnshire Regiment, along with the 8th Battalion Somerset Light Infantry. The 2 regiments were stationed side by side on the Western Front. Before heading to the front line, another chaplain, Reverend Geoffrey Stoddart Kennedy, pulled Hardy aside and gave some sage advice. Kennedy, who was to receive the Military Cross, had been nicknamed Woodbine Willie by his troops for his ready supply of cigarettes. His advice to Hardy was simple, practical, and religious. Take a box of fags in your haversack and a great deal of love in your heart, and go up to them, laugh with them, joke with them. You may pray with them sometimes, but pray for them always. Theodore Hardy was to take that advice to heart. We don't know how much he prayed with the men, nor do we know how often he prayed for them. But he certainly shared his cigarettes, and he was always there looking out for the men, especially those lying wounded in no man's land. His energy and endurance for a slightly built 51-year-old became almost legendary in the regiments. At the Battle of Arras in April 1917, he would go out with stretcher parties for 36 or even 48 hours without a rest. Likewise, a few months later, whilst at Passchendaele, he worked with equal vigour. One night he didn't return to the British trenches, and a search party was sent out to recover his body. They found him in a sodden shell hole, alive and well, but fast asleep from his exertions. In October 1917, Reverend Hardy volunteered to join a rescue party going out to retrieve men lying wounded from a failed attack the previous night. They brought all bar one of the men back to safety. Hardy now insists on going back out with the stretcher team to find the lone stricken man. Throughout the following night, he slowly inched his way forward to within 70 yards of the German positions, and, under rifle fire, he located the man. He then assisted a stretcher team by carrying him back to the British lines. And all this, despite his arm being in a splint due to a broken wrist. For this action, Theodore Hardy was awarded the Distinguished Service Order, the DSO. 2 months later, his bravery was once more recognised. This time, he went out through shellfire to carry a wounded soldier back home. Reverend Hardy now received the Military Cross. As the men of the 8th Battalions, the Lincolnshire Regiment and the Somerset Light Infantry entered, unbeknownst to them, the last year of the First World War, they acknowledged that their chaplain, or padre, was a bit special. Obviously a brave shepherd who looked after his flock, he was also a supplier of cigarettes, a writer of letters home, whose simple, cheerful shout of, "It's only me," always raised a smile. In April 1918, the regiments were tasked with taking Rosengal Wood in the Somme sector from the Germans. The attack initially went well, but soon the Germans counterattacked and drove the British back to their starting positions. Behind them in the woods they left countless dead and injured. And naturally, out there in this very fluid no man's land was Reverend Theodore Hardy. He found an injured officer and stayed with him until a stretcher party came out to rescue them. That was brave in itself, but when you consider that the Germans had actually passed them by and were now attacking the British trenches, Hardy and his injured comrade were not so much in no man's land as behind enemy lines. On another occasion during this battle, which incidentally lasted over 3 weeks, the 54-year-old chaplain witnessed a shell land on a fortified British post, which promptly collapsed on the 2 men inside. Hardy dug with his bare hands and brought one of the soldiers out alive. Despite his best efforts, he was too late to save the other occupant who had suffocated to death. 2 days later, on the 27th of April 1918, the British once more tried to take the wood, or at least what was left of it, but were again driven back. Once more the cries of the injured echoed across no man's land. Hardy, accompanied by a sergeant, went out through the mud towards the cries. He crawled to within just 10 yards of a German pillbox to find an injured soldier. This man was too weak to crawl back, so Hardy dragged him until he could risk carrying him on his back. Both men, plus the sergeant, made it to safety. For those 3 combined actions at Rosengal Wood, Theodore Hardy was awarded Britain's highest medal for valour, the Victoria Cross. King George V thought that with the DSO, the Military Cross and now the Victoria Cross, Hardy had more than done his bit and made him an honorary King's Chaplain. In this role, Hardy could stay away from the front line with his head held high. However, that was not Hardy's style. He chose to stay with his men. And it was whilst once more rescuing the injured that on the 11th of October, Hardy himself was mortally wounded. 1 week later, on the 18th of October 1918, Theodore Hardy VC, DSO, MC, died from his injuries. He was just 2 days short of his 55th birthday. 3 weeks later, the First World War came to an end. He was buried in a military cemetery at Rouen in Normandy. A plaque to his memory can be found in Carlisle Cathedral, as well as the schools he attended as a boy in London, and at his old church where he was a vicar before the war. A house at Nottingham High School, Hardy's House, also recognises their brave former teacher. Over 5,000 clergymen served as chaplains to the British Army during the First World War. 179 of them died with their men. Many were awarded medals of bravery, mostly for rescuing men, especially injured men, under fire. 3 of them were awarded the Victoria Cross. The other 2, in case you were wondering, were Reverend Noel Chavasse, attached to the Royal Fusiliers on the Western Front, and Reverend William Addison, who was serving on the Mesopotamian Front in modern-day Iraq. The energy, commitment and valour of all of these non-combatant clergy was recognised by King George V, who ordered that the word Royal be added to the Army Chaplains Department. They are the Royal Army Chaplains Department to this day. But of all those chaplains, Reverend Theodore Hardy was a bit special. The Victoria Cross, the DSO and the Military Cross. He stands as the most decorated British non-combatant of the First World War. Not that I think he would have cared much for that accolade. He'd have probably thought back to those words of wisdom given to him by Reverend Kennedy as he went to the front line. Take a box of fags in your haversack and a great deal of love in your heart. I think it's that selfless love for his fellow men that his medals for valour really represent. Well, thanks for joining me today, and if you enjoyed that story, then why not check out some of my others, such as Noel Chavasse, the Liverpool doctor who was awarded the VC twice during the First World War. My next video is going back in history to look at the British wars with Napoleon, so please subscribe so make sure you don't miss it. In the meantime, thanks for your support, keep well, and I'll see you again very soon.